Enjoying our beautiful rainy day. Yeah, I love it except for getting here. Like we were complaining about like the traffic. It's so bad. The second it rains, it's like everyone forgets what they're doing. And I feel like instead of 15 minutes, it's like almost 30 to get here today. It was obnoxious. So thank you for being here and being here on time. It's supposed to rain a lot tomorrow. I don't know if anyone saw that. It's like 1 to 2 inches. That's a lot of rain. So I'm excited. We were supposed to have our first soccer practice today. I'm like, oh, so sad. It's raining. We can't. What a shame. So I get to wait 1 more week before I have to run around with a bunch of 10 to 14-year-old girls, right? Which is always exciting. Always. Anyway, I had another thought that maybe it'll come back. I wrote a couple of things up here, and I'll talk about them at the end. But I put a few things up there, and I will get to them later when hopefully everybody is here. And before we jump back into this, I did give you a homework assignment. I hope you thought it was interesting. Did anyone listen to me reading it? Yeah, I don't remember what the word was. There was a word in there that I couldn't pronounce. Yeah. Yeah, so you're making me feel better. I appreciate that.
It's hard. No.
That's a tough word to say, right?
I felt that word.
I was reading it and I was like, oh, I'm not going to delete it at this point. I'm like 15 minutes in, like, forget it, right? So what I want to do, I want to give you just a couple of minutes, get into like 2-3 people, whatever's convenient around you, and kind of share your like thoughts and reactions. And we'll talk about it really quickly together before I collect it. But find a couple of people, just kind of chat about what you thought, what your opinions were, and then we'll bring it to the big group in a few minutes.
I sent you my.
Okay, yeah, I saw I had one. I didn't read it. Jason, right? Yeah. That's fun. Did you have a good time?
But I didn't have access to anything.
Totally fine. So I'll grade it on there. So you're fine. You don't have the permit. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Right. And sometimes like, you know, like, I also felt that. So. And then he's like, well, that's great to see. So I'm like, no, that's yeah, just wait for it. Like, just because I'm aware, it doesn't mean that I think what yes. Yeah, I mean, yeah. And then for the question, I was like, I don't know, the diagnosis question. That's not fair too. And I would explain this. But then you get home to that. Oh, I know. I absolutely believe that. It's a great health clinic. It's because we have access to like resources that you know otherwise have, and like staffing, like other people, like even though they're like so my
All right, like one more minute, one more minute.
Yeah. No, we don't got. Oh, we put in this all. I think you need to have training, you know what I mean? Then you can be yeah.
Like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my god, I just.
You can email it to me, just put like apples to Psych or something.
No, I think like, oh, the whole thing is like, it's real. It has a lot of. Oh, I have it.
Talk together. So the article or the excerpt from a book, right? So obviously it's old for one, but as I mentioned last time, he has rewritten it recently and still have the same perspective. It is a very polar opposite perspective of like the main group. And so I didn't necessarily expect you to agree with it, but it's interesting to give you a little bit of exposure to a different mentality. So I don't know, any thoughts? You agree, disagree, like any reactions? Yeah.
Yes, I understand. I can see it visually.
Okay.
I can't really word my way through it because it's like these people, he's saying that, it's all a myth and you go to a psychiatrist or, therapist or what have you to go and cope with your errors in judgment and ethics, which sometimes it can be that.
Sure.
Sometimes absolutely. But other times it's because you are mentally ill and you need to find ways to help you cope with that mental illness.
Yeah.
And, you'll go and get a general overview and those diagnoses that you can get, which, can be stigmatized, but that is mainly due to people's interpretations. It's not really, it's due to their uneducation, and misunderstandings of that.
Mhm.
That create the stigmas. It's not really, all the information is there. It's not people creating these stigmas, to forcibly, sometimes it can be, but to forcibly, create bad stigmas around those people, it's just kind of misunderstandings and everything. But like, sometimes they go to these psychiatrists because they're mentally ill.
Sure.
To help them cope with these mental illnesses. And, that's why you have these diagnoses to better pinpoint ways to better cope.
Mhm.
And yes, sometimes these ways cannot help, and you go back to the general overview and you use those to help you understand your mental illness and everything. Other times you pinpoint so that you can better cope with what you have, or what mental illness is that would better help you understand life and everything of this world.
Okay. Do you want to add there? You have a.
I understand maybe in the 1960s, we weren't completely sure that like the discipline of psychology is like an electrochemical process.
Mhm.
And how
We've learned a lot since
we've
then, for
learned
sure.
a lot since then. So I totally understand this side. I do not agree with it, but I understand like from the 1960s, it's like, yeah, like, oh, you just go to a shrink, like that kind of vibe. Because I feel that from like my grandfather. It's like, oh, I see my shrink, like that type. But there are like mental illnesses. There are like psychology is inherently biological.
Mhm.
If not with therapy helping, like if sometimes talking just works, because sometimes it's just a personality change. Maybe it's just an outlook change that you need, but sometimes it's a chemical imbalance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So
We're making our way over.
I think that the best point that he made was about how we don't really address the social problems that are causing,
Yeah.
what we do with mental wellness. Like, I mentioned in my paper, or like my paragraph, whatever, that there's like this phenomenon in Japan called hiroshi, which is, it translates to like death by overworking, because they have such a common like suicide rate because of like their work environments and how they're overworked. And so stuff like that, if you just give these people antidepressants and therapy, like that's not addressing the cause of their mental illness. But I completely disagree when he says that it's not a mental illness because it's a social problem. Like, I think that you can find a middle ground where
Sure.
you can address the mental problems happening, and you can also address the social problems happening. And I also thought that it was so like he said, there was like no like biological, scientific basis of
Mhm.
mental illness. When a lot of mental illnesses, like you have something like schizophrenia. and
Yeah.
it's like,
Which is almost purely biological,
yeah,
right?
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
so stuff like that is not. Oh,
Right.
it depends on the genetics.
Yeah, and I love the social element of it. Like, I think that that's something that I could resonate with as well. Like, obviously, we've learned a ton since he wrote that originally. But what I found so interesting was that he still felt that way,
Yeah.
like even just a handful of years ago, even though we have discovered a ton of things since the original. Anyone over here? Just stand over there. Stare at all of you intently. Oh, you look down. Anybody else? Yeah, yeah. We're literally making our way across the front row. I like this. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting how I'm happy honestly that he brought up the fact that a man is aware of himself and like he's tasked with burdens, not mental illnesses. I feel like people take mental illness and they kind of disable themselves. Not always, it
Sure.
can't be a case, it's a possibility. I think I've definitely seen it happen. And I don't think it's right for you to obscure yourself of responsibilities and limit yourself because you have a burden. We all have our own struggles, and not to diminish the severity of mental illness. It's important to learn coping mechanisms because I think that most of the journey is not diagnosing, but treating.
Hmm.
But what he said about, like, you can't use medical treatments for mental illness, I don't think that's true. Because our bodies are so like, chemical bonds have play a big part in our emotions, are like how we react every day, whether we can get through the day without probably like emotional outbursts. I mean, look at menopause, for example, women who go through menopause go through so many changes because their hormones are so imbalanced that they don't even recognize themselves and they go through so many things. So I feel like it just proves that you have to have more knowledge and be open-minded while realizing that life is gonna go on the way it is. And you should cope with whatever you're given in life, as opposed to letting it almost limit you and make you like put in a box.
Okay, great, yeah.
I think, the issue of him. Like mental illness and then physiochemical disease
Mhm.
seems to be like a theme. Like the difference between that is one can be explained purely like biologically and then another is like behavior based.
Yeah,
And that's where I think the non-medical treatment. Which is, or like medical treatment of non-medical. Like disease,
uh-huh,
then gets tricky because
Sure.
it's all based in ethics.
yeah, that's fair to say. I could see
Yeah.
where you're going with that, right? Was there, thought I saw him there. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Again, this is like a very different perspective than the mainstream, right? I just think it's important to know that not everybody agrees with what we're talking about, right? Not everybody agrees with the idea that everything is like diagnosable and something that we can label and treat. And there's so many just attitudes about mental illness and treatment and therapy and all these things in general that I wanted to make sure that you got a different perspective from the norm as well. So if you want to make sure your name is on there and go ahead and pass those up, we'll get back to where we were before. Yeah, if you want to, if you don't have it printed out, you can email it to me. Just make sure you put like Admirable Psych in the email. So. So we'll get back to where we were. Anxiety, back to being anxious. So we didn't get too far, but we got into it a little bit, right? We talked about anxiety versus anxiety disorders and then generalized anxiety. So something that's very not specific, right? Broad and a kind of across everything. What we'll look at today is we'll look at fear and phobias to start with, which is the opposite. It's something very specific. And just like with anxiety and anxiety disorders, everybody has fear. I imagine that every single one of you is afraid of something, right? Maybe it's not a phobia, it's not crippling, but you have things that you don't like or you would rather avoid if possible. Fear is adaptive It's normal. There are a lot of things out there that can hurt you in one way or the other. So it's appropriate to have fear, right? It's if you fall from a high enough height, it could kill you. The wrong snake or spider bites you, it could kill you, right? There's a lot of things that are very dangerous. So fear is our central nervous system's response to some kind of threat. Totally normal, often adaptive, but it can go too far and become what we would call a phobia. A phobia, or a specific phobia, because it's of something specific, is an intense and paralyzing fear that is excessive and unreasonable. So it goes beyond like a normal, typical adaptive fear. And it's often something that cripples you because you do whatever you can to avoid that thing that you have a phobia of, right? Anyone in here have a phobia, just by show of hands? Or something that you're like terrified of? I'm terrified of spiders. Like spiders, like I have a horrible phobia of spiders. And like I always put spiders in all of the slides and I'm like, why do I do this to myself? But I do it anyway. And it didn't help. Oh my gosh, I've had a phobia of spiders since a kid. I can trace it all the way back to like preschool. Like literally like in the preschool like grades, like I developed my fear of spiders. And then when I was a teenager, I went to this like wilderness camp in Utah. And I was the first person in the history of the Utah desert to be bitten by a brown recluse. I was like, how did it find me of all people? And I nearly lost my foot. I had to have multiple surgeries, right? Like its venom is crazy. Like, and they didn't identify it for days. And it like, I hit a point where it was going up my leg. I have a huge indent in my foot, in my very white feet, right? So I'm not gonna, but I'm terrified of spiders, right? They scare me so much. Even daddy long legs, which are totally like, they're like barely a spider. They scare me so much, right? And so anytime there's a spider, I avoid them. I will have dreams about things that are related to spiders. I was sharing with somebody that I don't love Oreos very much anymore because my cousin, well, it's technically it's my partner's cousin, sent me a picture years ago of an Oreo with a spider smashed into the filling. And even though I know she did it on purpose, I can't shake the thought that there might be spiders in my Oreos, so I don't eat them anymore. Right? It ruined Oreos for me, and I keep trying to eat them, but I have to like squish the filling and it's weird. So I'm terrified of spiders. They scare me so much. Other people, anyone else have a phobia you want to share? Yeah. Or someone in your life if you don't want to share.
Sounds like
Hmm.
pretty simple, but I would faint.
Okay.
Like I will like go into like a panic, like I can't play tag. Like as a kid, I realized I'm like, I can't play tag. Like, I go into a panic, I freak out. So that was just something I realized. And it's like any dream, like if I'm really stressed, I only have dreams about being chased.
Being chased.
And
Interesting.
it's just been something like even into my 20s and like
Mhm.
my boyfriend will like when we're like going up to unlock our house, it's like he'll like chase me and I like my stomach drops.
Okay.
It's the worst thing ever.
Yeah.
It's awful, actually.
Mhm.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Being chased. Yeah.
I have a phobia, so I'm like terrified of like vomiting. Like I, for the longest time, I couldn't even watch it. Like one, I had to like remove it, or it would freak me out so bad.
Okay.
I got better about the part, but just if somebody's actually going out, like I
You're out.
handle
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cotton balls.
Yeah. Oh, and I can't touch cotton balls. I can't watch somebody use a cotton ball.
Oh, the sound
feeling,
too.
the sound. Like I had a dream one time of where I was stuck in a cotton ball.
Oh,
I could hear I could feel it on my face.
yeah.
Like when I get my nails done, I have to do it.
Yeah. And that's where it's like excessive and unreasonable, right? Like cotton balls can't hurt you, but you have this phobia of them. And like oftentimes they develop like in weird connections to like conditioning when we're younger, like something that happened to you, right? But a couple of people agreeing with you there. And that sound, oh, and the feel of them, awful. Like even if I don't have a phobia, I don't want to touch one. There's a, yeah, you're good.
It's like really intense. Would be like because I'm so scared of like the content that like
Okay.
and it's like small ones with the fire.
Mhm.
It's not better, but like when I was like really bad, it's like
Yeah, yeah, and that's where it starts to interfere, and that could have some consequences if you're not eating because you're afraid to eat, Other people, any other, oh, I think we go here and then there, yeah.
It's funny, I know somebody who's gonna go in the medical field and their phobia of seeing people throw up, and I'm like, how does that work?
Yeah, that could be
How does that
tricky.
work? I was like, I was like, how do you in your job? And I was like, okay.
You can push through phobias. You definitely can, right? But sometimes it's challenging to do. I think we'll go here, yeah.
So I've had a fear of heights like as long as I.
Heights, yeah.
I think it's specifically things from like the second story of the South Coast Wall.
Okay,
I would have.
the
recurring
glass
dreams-
walls, like
If there's like the railing with the bars, and I
Yeah.
would have dreams as a kid, like every night where I just would fall through the railing.
Yeah.
To the point where I refused to go up the escalator.
Wow.
every night, but
You know what's, I'm laughing because I like as a kid had the same fear. Like that one I outgrew, not the spiders, but that one like went away from me. But that's not uncommon. Heights is a really common one. And those glass barriers, they don't inspire a lot of confidence, do they? Yeah.
I used to have a fear of spiders, like irrational.
Yeah.
I couldn't do anything, and then I got into the pet trade, like
Mm.
just keeping exotic animals, and I now keep tarantulas.
Oh,
Like
good
I
for you.
got through it by keeping them as pets.
Okay.
Because it's such a different experience because you have full control
Yeah.
over their little.
As long as they don't get out.
Yeah,
right?
as long as they don't get out. I don't know how to-
I just got like sweaty palms thinking about owning a tarantula. No, that's fine. You have your hand up too, right? Like
I have like an intense phobia of balloons.
balloons, yeah.
I remember like I start crying.
Mhm.
Like I remember my friends at the dollar store were chasing me with a balloon and I was
Like combine the two of your fears right there, like chasing with a balloon. Yeah, no, I mean, and like, it's not a fun thing anyway. You had your hand up too, yeah.
I am like violently scared of like all bugs and things that like fly, like butterflies and ladybugs. I cannot, it's their unpredictability that I cannot get over.
Yeah.
And, like when I got up on my street, I'm going to go to the botanical gardens and they have like a butterfly, like dome, and Caitlin's gonna go there in there by themselves.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna stand in there. Absolutely not. Their unpredictability is insane, but also crickets are a big one. I cannot with crickets. I cannot, when I was little, my older brother, he got like a leopard gecko and he had to feed him crickets. And I was like, oh, that would be cool to have one.
Yeah.
I didn't actually want one. I liked the idea of having one, but I was so scared of bugs, I knew that I couldn't do it. And then my parents got me a leopard gecko for my birthday and I was like, I didn't ask for this. And they're like, yes, you did. And I was like, no, I did not. And I had a panic attack every single time that I had to feed it because of the crickets. Panic attack every single night for like years.
Yeah, that's awful.
It was terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
cannot.
no, I'm not a big fan of flying things either. My daughter, Kaya, the one who hasn't come in yet, has a crazy fear of praying mantises. Right, like, and like, again, phobias kind of come from an event. She was brushing
What are you on?
she was brushing her hair one day, and as she was brushing her hair, like, she felt something and went like this. I pulled it out and it was a praying mantis.
Oh.
And like, she has never been the same since, like, every time she sees one, like, she like freaks out and runs, like, and she has like beautiful curly hair, and she was like brushing it, and she's like, ah! And I freaked out and like, has never recovered. It was like 6 months ago and definitely in phobia land now. Well, there was a couple of hands over here, yeah. Over here in the ocean, that's pretty common.
what if I drown? What if there's like an animal under me that's gonna attack me, bite me, sting me? So a lot of unknown under there.
Yeah.
And marine biology, they don't tell me.
Yeah, once you learn all the things that are in there, it doesn't make it better. Yeah, you're. Let's keep it out so we can hear.
My dad has like super bad fear of just swimming in
Swimming,
general. So
okay.
I've never learned how to swim because of him.
Oh.
And we were on this vacation in Mexico and we were on this like speedboat. And then we like dropped off people with like life vests and everything to go like scuba dive and explore everything like under the water.
Yeah.
And then like my stepmom pulled him into the water and he freaked out and the whole entire boat was like concerned about him because there's like this 50-year-old big guy like in the water like screaming like little girl. And we were like on the speedboat, we're like, Dad, it's fine, you have a life vest. And he was like in tears. I've never seen my dad like that.
That's awful. Right, and that tends to be like that phobia response. I mean, it's funny to other people sometimes because it's often unreasonable. It's so excessive, right? But when it's your fear, it's not funny at all, right? It's terrifying. It's awful. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. I want to know the backstory of
I guess the way that they approach him and he just starts like trying to film.
Okay. Yeah, wild, right? So,
Makes animals do it.
yeah, it definitely can. My cat Rolly, my fat cat, today's his birthday, actually. He turned 6 today. I bought him food.
Aw.
I bought him a big dinner. He's super chunky, our fat cat Rolly. He's terrified of men. Like, it's become a joke in our house. Like, whenever we have like a repair guy or anybody come over, like we have to replace our roof. And there was a day like 2 weeks ago where I had 2 guys come over to give me estimates. And he sat in the corner and hissed at them for like 30 minutes. The guy was like, should I leave? I don't think your cat likes me. I'm like, he doesn't like men, right? And he must have been traumatized. So yeah, animals too. Like, I don't know what happened. We've had him since he was a baby, but he's terrified of men. Maybe because he lives in a house of all females. I don't know. But we have like all girls, even most of our cats. But anyway, it can be people, it can be animals. Yeah.
That with the popularity of social media, that fear of not being your phone is also a phobia. It could become, because I feel
It could
like
be.
it's so commonly a fear,
Mhm.
that I don't think it can be categorized as a phobia. It's
Yeah.
not a rest.
No, I mean, I would say it's probably more like, I would say anxiety or fear. I mean, a phobia, there's a level of severity with phobias that, I mean, it could be like anything could be a phobia, literally anything. So it's definitely possible, right? For sure. I have a little video about phobias that I'll play for you. The woman in the video is afraid of feathers, okay, and birds. Okay, so just as like a heads up if that's something that bothers you. Feathers. Water, right? But what I love about that is that they show you the physiological response she has to being exposed to a feather, right? So when you have exposure to something that you have a phobia of, it causes an instant physiological reaction. Like your palms get all sweaty, your heart starts pounding faster, you breathe faster, you want to get away from it. That's really typical with phobias. And like she's explaining in there, it was linked to an event. That's often the case with these. They often come out of some kind of conditioning. Yeah.
Is it possible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, or it could be something you're not even aware of, right? Like, a lot of phobias become cultural and almost generational. Like there was a whole generation terrified of clowns because of it, or terrified of like Chucky because of like when that came out. Jaws is the #1 horror movie of all time because of the number of fears it inspired of the ocean and sharks. Kind of dated now, but Psycho was a really big one way back when it came out. People were afraid to take showers, that they'd get murdered in the shower. Not even scary if you watch it now, right? But there's a lot of like, it's interesting, you might even just see something, right? And it didn't even happen to you, and it can be enough to cause a phobia, right? So it's kind of wild how they can sometimes happen without even having an event happen to you. Yeah. Dolls.
There was this one time when my cousin like had a like with a doll, and she just ran to a corner and started crying and bawling. It's like,
Yeah, and that's a typical reaction for a phobia, right? And as I mentioned, you can have a phobia of literally anything. There's a whole list of them in your book. You can even have a phobia of having a phobia. Like it's wild. There's a list of literally everything. One very common and specific one, social anxiety disorder. So they used to be called social phobia, but they changed it to be a little broader. But this is a very common one where people are terrified to perform in front of other people, right? They are afraid to speak in front of others, be in front of others. Like I said, I have 3 kids. I have one more that hasn't come yet because she's afraid to come, right? So I'm like, no one's gonna hurt you. Like they're really nice. And she's like, but they're gonna look at me. It's possible, like, but she's also in middle school, which is really common at that age where you think everyone is staring at you, that whole like imaginary audience thing. But this is a very common phobia as well. Social anxiety, really up there on the list. That's why that speech class is so notoriously unpopular for so many people. And as I mentioned, a lot of these come from conditioning, right? So something happens to you or someone else, you watch something in a movie, you witness something, 2 events become linked together. Now, you might not be able to trace your phobia back consciously, but a lot of people can. A lot of people can trace it back to like a specific event. And it typically happens during childhood when you don't quite have like a full grasp of the situation or like the consequence or gravity of a situation. Could also be that you observe somebody else. And interestingly, we have a predisposition towards certain phobias, right? Things that tend to be harmful. If you think of like spiders, snakes, heights, a lot of the things that people are afraid of do have an element of danger to them, which makes us a little bit more vulnerable to having them. But most commonly, it's conditioning. And so we can use that, the fact that they're caused by like two things being linked together, we can use that to help treat them. There are some really like popular and helpful treatments for phobias here on the next slide, but a lot of, like I said, conditioning, modeling, and then a little bit of like a predisposition towards certain things as well. The two most common treatments, as I walk by this slide, I looked at it as I walked by. Every time, like on this slide, it's all about like facing your fear. Like, I can do that. I can touch the spider, and then I lose my result. Right? No, I can totally do it. Right? Like, look, it's on my hand. It's awful. Ew. My hands are all sweaty. Right? Anyway. Well, now I'm all gross. But systematic desensitization of two very different ways to tackle fear. Both of them, though, involve facing your fear. One's more dramatic and head-on, and one's a little more like gradual and plain and slow. Systematic desensitization, you systematically desensitize yourself to something that scares you. Okay, so you create what we would call like a fear hierarchy, and then you slowly face each item on that hierarchy, pairing it with relaxing and breathing. You're trying to recondition whatever it is that scares you. So if you were afraid of heights, for example, maybe you go to 1 story and you calmly breathe and you relax, then 2, then 3, then 4. It's very slow. It takes time. And you slowly move up that hierarchy to gradually tackle the fear. Yeah.
So for like this kind of like exposure kind of therapy, how would you do that with your, like, for instance, like
Throwing up, right? So you would create a list of like what scares you the least to the most with throw up. Like what would be the worst possible exposure? Like maybe it's someone throwing up all over you, right? We don't want to talk too much about this because it bothers a few people, right? But you would create like the worst possible outcome and then what you think you could maybe handle. Like, could you look at a picture? Could you talk about it? A video, right? And you would slowly work your way up till you could handle like whatever, whatever hierarchy you created. On the flip side of that, flooding is when you face a fear head on in a massive, intense exposure. This is kind of like the idea of somebody who's afraid of heights going skydiving, right? It's like, I'm just going to rip the Band-Aid off, tackle it head on, and try and get over it quickly. People tend to have one or the other that they gravitate toward. The nice part about flooding is it tends to be fast, right? It's a one-time massive exposure, but it's also incredibly intense, incredibly distressing. People cry, people have had heart attacks, panic attacks. You would never do either of these without like a discussion ahead of time. Like it's something you would talk about and build up to in therapy. But flooding is much more hands-on and direct. I have an example of flooding. This guy's afraid of heights. Okay, so let me show you what flooding would look like for somebody who has a phobia of height, which is the top, and his fear kind of slowly starts to come down, right? And the way our body works, as he was explaining, the therapist was explaining, there's only so much energy that we have, and so you can't keep that energy up forever. You're gonna reach a peak and slowly start to come down. That's the idea behind flooding. Instead of taking him up like 1 story, 2 stories, 3 stories in a gradual kind way, it's let's go to the tallest building we can find, push you, right? And once you see that you can get through that, in theory, then like a couple of stories shouldn't scare you as much if you survive it, right? Like he jokes about dying, right? Sometimes people do have heart attacks, panic attacks. It's a lot of strain on you, but you are typically doing this with a therapist. You've mapped it out, you've planned it out. And so it's something that you obviously are expecting. It would never be sprung on you out of nowhere. But if you had to pick one, think of whatever you're afraid of, whether it's a fear or a phobia. If you had to pick one approach, how many of you would pick systematic desensitization by show of hands? Remember, how about flooding? Rip that Band-Aid off. Like 50-50, right? Again, they both have their merits, right? And it's just kind of a personal preference. But the idea with both of them is we're reversing the conditioning that's taken place. So very popular techniques for treating phobias. Yeah.
Success rate thing, like, is there instances where, okay, we do this whole thing and then it doesn't work, or
Yeah.
maybe it'll just improve it, but I don't know.
It can sometimes make it worse
Right.
too, right? It's like, okay, so I mean, this obviously is like the worst case scenario. But let's say that you do something like flooding to face a fear and something goes wrong. You might not ever get over it at that point, and that's just really unfortunate, but it happens. There was a story of this, oh my gosh, it was in the news like, it's like 8 years ago. This guy was doing flooding therapy. He was afraid to fly. So he got on an airplane and the plane crashed, right? And like, and that's obviously like, you can't think of a worst case scenario, right? And so like in those instances, like you might not ever realistically get over that fear. Yeah, like it was like, no one was, they were like minor injuries, thankfully, but it was like his worst fear and he lived through it. And so the therapist, it was like this whole interview of the therapist trying to be like, you survived, that was the worst scenario and you made it. And he's like, I'm never flying again, as you would imagine, right? Like if you have a fear of something and you expose yourself to it, and it goes wrong. I mean, you can't ask for worse than that really, but it can make it worse for people, but they tend to be pretty successful. People who do flooding tend to be a little more motivated sometimes, because it's like a faster rip the Band-Aid off versus much more slow and gradual. So it tends to have high success rates if you do it properly and things go properly. The next disorder in this group, kind of related a little bit, panic attacks. Panic attacks can happen once, in which case it would be a panic attack. If you have them repeatedly, we call it panic disorder. Okay, so sometimes people have a single panic attack, it never happens again, but then they develop a fear of it happening again, right? And that can lead to what we call a panic disorder. So with a panic attack, you have to have 4 or more of a bunch of different symptoms, so 4+ symptoms. Reaching a peak within moments. So this tends to be kind of a short-lived experience, but people can be drained and wiped out from it for the rest of the day. Sometimes people have to go to sleep because they're so wiped out from that. But it tends to be like a 10-minute or less sort of experience for most people. And so some of the things that you can experience, so get a list, there's a bunch of them. So one of them is you have heart palpitations. Oftentimes people think they're having a heart attack. Very common that people go to the emergency room thinking they're having a heart attack, and it turns out to be a panic attack. It feels like your heart is pounding and racing. You might have chest pain. That's another one that can come with this. And so people go to the hospital, like the emergency room, and oftentimes they see this as a panic attack. Obviously, it could be the other two, but we see a lot of panic attacks. Sweating, trembling, a lot of like physical symptoms, like again, reaching a peak very, very quickly. Yeah, you had your.
Oh, I was gonna say that weird happened. It's like such a crazy story. It was like senior year graduation night, and my mom, for some reason, had I don't know why, she had a panic attack.
Yeah.
And she thought that she was having a heart attack. She
Yeah.
went to the ER on graduation night. Like, it's so crazy.
Yeah, and that happens a lot, right? It's wild how often people go to the emergency room thinking it's a heart attack. And they can be brought on by nothing, is what sometimes makes them so scary. A few other things. So you can have shortness of breath. Sometimes people feel like they're choking. They can't swallow, they can't breathe. Very, very common. Nausea. Feel dizzy. A lot of physical symptoms because there's so much going on in your body. People can have what's called derealization, where everything around them feels very unreal, almost like it becomes like tunnel vision in a way. You could feel really disconnected from the world around you. Fear of losing control. Fear of dying. What happens is sometimes when people are having a panic attack and all these things are going on, they get even more panicked and then they just fuel it. And that can be a really tough one to break. Chills or hot flashes. right? A whole ton of different physical symptoms, right? And again, the key with these is that they reach a peak within about 10 minutes and then they start to subside. And so if you have one of them, again, panic attack, having them recurrently, so more than one, is a panic disorder. And sometimes just one, the issue that people have is they start developing this fear. What if I'm out in the world and I have another panic attack, right? And so they start avoiding things. And so there's a really interesting thing that can go with this called agoraphobia. Agoraphobia is so common with panic disorder that we actually diagnose it with or without agoraphobia. Agoraphobia is when people stop leaving their home or a place of security because they're afraid they're going to have a panic attack out in the world, right? And so they stay home, right? They don't want to go out because they don't want to be out in the world and lose control and not have a safe place. This also can have kind of other elements, not liking to be trapped, not liking crowds or public places. I told you I have two fears. Agoraphobia is my other one. I will never sit in the middle of a row because it makes me feel trapped. And then I feel like I can't get out and I get hot and then I get anxious, right? I don't like to be like trapped in the middle of anything. Whenever we go to a movie or a performance, like I have to sit on the end or I'd rather not go, right? Because I don't like to be like confined. And that's one element of that, of this. It can also be not wanting to leave your house. You had your hand up a minute ago. Did you have a?
No, I didn't get to the point where it became like a more idea, but I had a panic attack once, and then it became like I was having the other ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, but two experiences. One time, I I had a panic attack. I was in church, and like it was just like it could have almost been that it was really crowded, but I was like in the back, and it got so bad that I passed out, and I just woke up and I was outside, and that was really. But another time I had a panic attack and it got to the point where I became nauseous. That was like the first time where I got to the point where I was nauseous. But that time I'm a main fighter and it was right after a fight and I think it was just like a mix of like tiredness and people watching and like I finished the fight and I ran out and like I remember grabbing onto a pole and just sliding down. And again, I had like tunnel vision and my hearing went out.
Yeah. Scary, right? And like feels so out of your control. And what happens for people is you start to feel it coming. It causes you to have more panic, right? Which just fuels the cycle. So that's a really big part of treating these or like helping you learn to deal with them is when you notice those signs of panic to help you like stop it rather than only fueling it, which only makes it worse, but it's so easy to do. Yeah.
Someone I know, they always say that they have anxiety attacks. Is that
Yeah, that's the same thing.
as a
Yeah.
panic attack?
So technically it's not like a disorder of any kind. What they're referring to is probably a lesser version of a panic attack. So it's not actually like a diagnosable thing, but I hear that all the time. I get anxiety attacks. And that could just be like a lot of anxiety coming forward, which could lead to a panic attack or just be anxiety. Not that anxiety is not a lot, but it's a common way that people refer to these, but sometimes on like a lesser level, but it's not actually diagnosed. Yeah. Yeah. It could be, right? Maybe the service dog makes you feel comforted and calm. And so as long as you have that service dog with you, you're okay in those situations or okay going out into the world. Yeah, that could be one way that people fight against it. For sure, finding ways to make you feel safe, right? This has a lot to do with safety for people, right? I need to be somewhere where I feel safe. I don't want to be away from a place of safety. Is there another? Any other thoughts or comments about panic attacks? I've been trying to push myself so much. Like I'll sit like 2 or 3 seats in now. That's a progress for me. Like, cause in the past, like no way. We went on our cruise in November and we went to a show and it was this massive theater and the only like spots that were left were like in the middle. And I was like, forget it, we're out. Like, I don't want to go. Like, I don't want to go anymore. And my kids were like, come on. All right, fine. So I had to sit in the middle of a row and I spent like the whole time just like sweating, but it was okay, right? And again, it's almost like a form of flooding, right? I'm facing the fear head on. The more that I do that, the more that it helps. When we go to movies now, I'll sit like in the second or third row and or like second or third seat of the row. Like I've gotten a little better, but I still like, oh, if I had my choice, I'd sit like right where you are every time, right? Like right by the door and right on the edge. Yeah.
How do you feel on planes? Because I like.
Yeah, you know what's funny is if, so it's so strange, like when we go to, on a plane or when we go out to dinner, is if I'm all the way in, I'm also okay. Yeah, so like on a plane, I can sit, I don't like to sit in the middle. In the middle, I feel trapped, but no one wants to sit in the middle anyway, right? Like it's uncomfortable. I'll sit between my two kids in the middle, and I often end up having to do that anyway. And that's fine because they're like a source of safety for me. But if it were strangers, I'd be like, forget it. I'll take the next flight, right? Thankfully, that hasn't happened, but sometimes because we always fly Southwest. And so like without a guaranteed seat, I'm always like, oh, am I gonna be in the middle today? And I feel that anxiety, getting on the plane. Or like when we eat, like I said, all the way in the booth. And I'm okay. It's so strange. I'm not sure I understand that, but I spent a lot of time thinking about it. Was there another? I think of hands, right? Okay. So this one's relatively common. A lot of people get panic attacks, again, with or without agoraphobia. Very biological, right? Panic attacks have a lot of biology to them, a lot of abnormalities in the neurotransmitter norepinephrine. Norepinephrine plays a big role in panic attacks, right? There's just like a surge of it. And that tends to relate to an area of the brain called the locus ceruleus, which is up here on the slide. And so we do a lot of like medication to help people calm down, right? Find ways to lower your anxiety. So it can be like SSRIs, anti-anxiety medications, some of those barbiturates that we talked about, but a lot of like things related to norepinephrine. Yeah. Yeah, phobias can have, it's tricky to tell, right? It's that nature nurture debate. Like if you grow up with a parent that has a phobia of spiders and you have a phobia of spiders, it's more likely that you've learned it. They don't tend to have like a strong genetic piece, panic attacks more so. But phobias tend to be a little more learned. But panic attacks can be somewhat genetic. Cognitively, I mentioned this, it's like that meta worrying again. It's like the second you feel anxiety, you panic, right? And you start to panic and then you fuel it and it makes it worse and worse and worse. And so what one of the tricks is when somebody starts to feel that panic coming on, distraction. Find a way to distract yourself as quickly as possible to pull yourself out of it. Or find a way to calm down, whether that's like you mentioned, a service dog or like a pet or like whatever item makes you feel safe and calm. But if you freak out instantly, it only makes it worse and it can launch you right into it. Some people have very high anxiety sensitivity and the littlest thing kind of sets them off. And so it's a lot of like learning how to react better when you feel it starting and distraction. Like there's a TikTok, I always see it. My partner watches way too much TikTok and I just watch it with her. But it was like this person of like starting to have a panic attack and his friend like asks him for something completely random. Like, here, hold this, do this. And it's so random and bizarre. And then like the friend's like, why? Like, and all irritated. And then he's like, oh, I feel better, right? Like, oh, my panic attack has calmed down. It's distraction, right? Rather than focusing on everything going on, all of this, distraction and thinking about something else can be one way to pull out of it. Another way, like deep breathing, calming down. I had a lot of clients who would have something like a rock or like something they would hold on to and rub as a way to like calm themselves down. Something along those lines. Yeah. Do you have a thought?
Is there a difference between like
Yeah, so panic attacks are often brought on by nothing. Like it can be brought on by anything and nothing. Versus PTSD, which we'll talk about in I think it's the next chapter, right? PTSD is much more triggered by something specific, right? And so it's one item. It has more in common with a phobia than a panic attack in that way. It's like one thing will trigger you, a time of day, a sound, a smell.
is that?
The result that, so you wouldn't technically label it a panic attack because it was triggered by something that happened in your past and a trauma and whatnot. But the physical outward response and inward response might show up very similarly, if that makes sense. So you have a lot of the same symptoms, but it's triggered by something specific from a traumatic event that happened. So we diagnose it as PTSD, but could appear the same way, if that makes sense. Yeah. The next one that we'll get into, OCD. But before we get to obsessive compulsive disorder, I feel I need to talk about superstitions, because OCD is very rooted in superstitious thinking. Okay, and a lot of us have superstitions. Like, if I do X, then Y will happen, or if I don't do X, then Y will happen, right? Some kind of belief that the things that we do can be influenced by unrelated events, things related to like luck and prophecy. We just had the Super Bowl, right? Athletes are notorious for superstitious thinking. Watch anybody who goes like up to the plate in baseball. They have like a little routine they do every time with their bat, and whether they step in the box or out of the box, do their glove and redo their glove, going up to shoot like a foul shot, right? Going up, how many times you dribble the ball or flip it. Athletes have a lot of these like ritualistic things they do, and they believe if they don't do it, like bad things will happen, or they won't make the shot or whatever, right? So here are some really common ones. What a day keeps the doctor away? An apple. Step on what and break what? Crack and break your mother's back, right? As a kid, I've been mad at my mom. Every crack I could find, right? Good luck to carry a rabbit's foot. Bad luck to walk under a ladder. Bad luck to break a mirror. And black water, bad luck. I have two, right? I'm doomed. Black cats, 2 black cats. What are some other ones? Anyone else have other superstitious beliefs that personally or that you've heard? Yeah. Yeah, that's bad. That's super bad, right? My daughter did that this morning. I'm gonna have a bad day. No, I'm just having a right? From this perspective, yeah. Oh. Jeez. Harsh consequences. Right, okay, good to know, right? Yeah.
So there's a belief that you can never have your shoe lying on the ground, like one's up and one's flipped.
Mhm.
It has to be like they're put together neatly, because when you have it flipped, the soles are like on top,
Okay,
it's bad luck in the house.
interesting. All right, I've heard that one before. Interesting, yeah.
Putting your purse on the ground.
Oh, okay. Is that bad luck?
Yeah.
Oh, no, don't do that, right? Don't do that and don't whistle, right? Yeah.
If you say something, you don't say it.
Yeah, knocking on wood, right? Really common one. And that comes from a really interesting idea that spirits lived within trees. And so anything made of a tree, when you knock 3 times on wood, you're calling upon the good spirit's fortune to protect you, right? They all have these really interesting beliefs behind them, yeah. Yeah, right? Yeah, you develop this way, if I cut it, we'll lose, or if I cut it, yeah. Isn't that funny? And if you watch like athletes, some of them don't shave their, like in the NFL, they won't shave their beard or cut their hair until a certain point because they don't want to jinx it, right? Well, here in the,
I remember hearing about lunch kids, just like swallowing the 7 years back.
Yeah. Yeah, right, I think because it sits in your stomach for a long period of time, or, yeah, I remember that one too, right, don't swallow.
Okay, so 2 more.
Okay.
Sleeping with the fan on your
Oh, no, I've died many times. Right? Yeah.
And then last one, like putting chopsticks, spoon on fork, like.
Oh, yeah.
These are your guys.
Paisleys on the way to death, for sure, right? Yeah.
Like when you're like, working in like a food service job, and you can't say the word slug.
Okay,
It's slug, you can't say.
second you say it's slow,
Yeah.
you're gonna be
exactly. It
swamped.
goes along with, like jinxing it,
Yeah,
it's the same thing. No, that's
Yeah, that's a real
the other
thing.
day, like my manager, my new manager, like of like a couple weeks, she was like, do not say the S word.
Uh-huh,
Because it was so slow yesterday in the morning.
Yeah.
Like, do not say the S word, don't you even dare.
don't
I was
even
like,
think
oh my God.
it, right, yeah, like you jinx it, like there's like a jinx element to it, right,
I've
yeah.
heard of one, like in, where it's like in the girls' bathroom, like the last stall has like this like spirit. that-
Oh, no.
Do you see what it's called?
Okay,
Learn about it.
interesting, just to add to the, like, the dangers of bathrooms, right, there's a spirit in the last stall, oh no, right, yeah, did you have that too? Oh, no, anybody else? Yeah,
Is that you can. Sweep the floor at night in the entire apartment.
Okay.
And if you sleep in the wet area, you're gonna be right,
Oh, no. Oh, my goodness. So many cool, I love like the learning about the other cultural ones that we don't always hear, because I think it's so fascinating. Anybody else have another one? Spilling salt is one that I always think of, like it's bad luck to spill salt, so you have to throw the salt over your left shoulder to blind the demons that are behind you. That's why you throw it over your shoulder, because it brings demons when you spill the salt, because salt used to be a really expensive commodity. So bad luck, you have to throw it over your shoulder to blind the demons. Friday the 13th is another one, like ideas around that. People sneeze, you say, God bless you, because you were gonna die of the plague. That's where that comes from, right?
I
Yeah,
heard it was because when you sneeze, your soul comes out of your body.
that too.
So you have to say bless you in order for it to go back.
To go back, right? Couple of different takes on it, yeah.
So my mom and my stepdad, they got married a couple of weeks ago on Friday 13th on purpose. Like they have this
On purpose.
wedding, yeah. And my grandmother, my mom's mom, was like really, really religious. So she was borderline almost didn't come. because
Yeah.
of that. It was
Oh,
pretty
wow, yeah. Like, and again, like people tend to believe in these quite a bit, and there's nothing wrong with being superstitious, but going too far with it can have problems. Yeah.
You're going next to. Not to say afraid, this is habitat before, which is watch out.
Okay.
Because we believe these, creatures called duende,
Uh-huh.
they're kind of like. Or like humanity's verbs.
Okay.
If you want
Oh,
to,
smart.
you'll have bad luck.
Okay. Don't leave in the tree. So I can handle not doing that one. Yeah.
I think it's like December like 27th or something like that. My partner's cousin can't drive on that day. She refuses to drive because she got in a car accident.
Hmm,
2 years in a row on that same day. So
interesting.
she refuses to drive on December 27th.
That's really bad luck.
Like
Yeah.
she will have somebody else drive her, but if she is driving the car, nope, absolutely not. She
Yeah.
will not.
Yeah, wild, right? And that's very like along the lines of like PTSD kind of thinking that we'll get to in the next chapter. I had one other one. Oh, if you're like in theater, right, you don't say good luck, right? You say break a leg, right? Like everything, there's so many of these, Yeah. Yeah, don't say Macbeth, that's a jinx too, because of the whole story of Macbeth and all the things that happen, right? Yeah.
I know salt is very important, like throwing on the shoulder is correct, but for us, you throw over the left shoulder to get rid of the evil eye
Yeah.
and protect your vehicle, like your car. From evil eye, you keep salt in it.
Okay.
So people don't jinx you and give you bad energy.
All right. Right.
That's why in a single Muslim household, you're gonna see the evil eye in the hand.
Okay.
Like
Okay.
it's most likely gonna be in an entrance or on the corner of just, I think in my house, I have like 30 different evil eye hands hanging somewhere.
Interesting. Yeah.
like that was the one protection. It was so very so that's getting it.
Right. I've read the evil eye.
Evil eye is basically the concept of someone gossiping you or giving you, like talking bad about you, so that energy goes into your life,
Mm.
like bad vibes. So you would try to avoid that by the eye. It's always watching out for you.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
There's a ton of these, right? And I imagine a lot of you like do them whenever, like the knock on wood one is one I see all the time, like people always knocking on wood, but there are tons. And again, nothing wrong with a superstitious thought. Oftentimes they come out of like, religious beliefs or cultural beliefs or things that happen to you. But when people embrace them too much, it very much can lead to things like OCD. Okay, so OCD has a lot of superstitious thinking elements to it. If I don't check this, something bad will happen. If I don't lock this door 5 times and unlock it 5 times, something bad will happen, right? So there's this kind of superstitious piece to OCD that's very common, but it's gone too far, right? And it's starting to interfere with your life. So OCD is when people have these like disturbing thoughts that cause them to then perform senseless rituals. And they tend to go together. You have the thoughts, which lead to a ritualistic behavior to make yourself feel better. Okay, so what we have, if we break down obsessive and compulsive, obsessions are the thoughts that occur over and over and over again. And compulsions are the rules that you then, or like the behaviors that you do according to certain rules. So if you have like a fear of contamination, which became very, very, very common a few years ago, right? And still persisted for a lot of people. Maybe you have to wash your hands a certain number of times in order to actually get the germs off. Or maybe you feel like you have to lock and unlock your front door 5 times in order for it to actually be locked and to be safe, right? There's a lot of like that kind of thinking that goes with this disorder. So some kind of distressing thought, and then you perform a ritualistic behavior to make the thought go away. And I have more on this, but I'm realizing we only have a few minutes left and I want to just touch on the things on the board. So I'm going to stop on the slide here, but I still have a few more things before we're out of time. I wrote a couple of things up here just to kind of keep them on your radar. The first one, I probably didn't need to remind you, but we don't have school Monday, right? I will send an announcement. Some of you look shocked, so maybe it's good that I did remind you, right? But we don't have school Monday, right? It's a holiday, so no class. Happy and sad, right? I'll miss all of you, but yay, we don't have school, right? So no school on Monday, so just something to be aware of. I'll send out an announcement over the weekend just to remind you in case you forgot. Give me like 2 more minutes before you pack up. Just so I don't have to talk to you. The second thing, I sent out an announcement. I don't know if you saw it or not. Did anyone see it? The self-care thing? Okay. So I have a bunch of things in my book that don't have an image. And if you're interested, I sent out an announcement. If you'd like to be, I'm like revising it and it's going to be republished for like real over the summer. So if you want to, just for fun, you can send me a picture of any of those things. Look at the announcement, but I did send it out. If you want your picture and little description to be in there, there's like a list of 30 different things you could take a picture of. You're doing some part of it. There's some instructions on there to look over. But if you do that, I'm looking for like 30 pictures to include in my book, if you're interested, just for fun. And then finally, you do have that first part of your diagnosis paper due in a week. Okay, so something to be thinking about. I'll talk more about it on Monday. It's really short. It's only worth 10 points, but I want you to start thinking about what character do you want to spend time diagnosing for your paper. So over the weekend, start thinking about it, right? It can be anyone from a TV show or a movie or even a video game, but you're going to be writing a whole paper diagnosing a character. And so I want you to start thinking about that. It will be due next week. Yeah. On Wednesday. Oh yeah, I can't talk about it. I'll talk about it on Wednesday. Thank you. I just told you that, right? So it's very, very brief. All you're doing for this paper is giving me the name of the character, the name of the movie or show, and why. Okay, you're typing it up and turning it in on Canvas. Thank you. I didn't put that together for you. Like I'll talk about it on the day we don't have school. Right. I'm gonna blame it on the fact that I tried to touch the spider. It threw me off.
Fair enough.
Right. So be thinking about this. I'll touch on it on Wednesday. It's very brief, but the biggest thing for now is start thinking about who you want to spend time. Okay. So we'll pick up on this when I see you on Wednesday. Have a wonderful long weekend and I'll see you next week. Yeah. And remember, they're all on Canvas too, if you're ever needing help. Just if it's ever feels too fast.
Like, and then never went down from there. It's like,
Yeah.
which one I want to do? Like, I have a little small